Hi guys, and welcome back to the Early Bird Photo News. Today we're going to do some unboxing, look at some new cameras coming out next week, and if you watch till the end, you're going to find out why Nikon is following Canon and also blocking third-party lenses. As you can see, we had to move Airbnbs again, and I'm in another makeshift YouTube studio, this time in my bedroom actually. But at least this is going to be the last move we had to do before we can move into our own house in a few weeks' time. So hopefully in that new house, I will be able to install a proper YouTube studio that looks better and makes it so much easier for me to do all the filming. There's actually also a bunch of people doing some lawn mowing around me right now, but with the new voice isolation feature in DaVinci Resolve Studio, I'm pretty confident that I can clean up the audio and have a nice, clean sounding file, even though there's a lot of background noise at the moment. In a few past episodes, we've already been talking about the upcoming Canon R8, and I wasn't too impressed when I heard about it initially because I thought, why does Canon need another low-end camera? But now we've received a few more specs and the camera will likely be announced next week, and I must say it actually looks much better than I thought it would be. Alongside the R8, Canon will also announce an R50 mirrorless camera, which is kind of the mirrorless version of the M50 Mark II or the M6. So a small camera with no electronic viewfinder and no in-body image stabilization. And I assume the camera will most likely have the same sensor as the Canon R10, a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, so a sensor with a 1.6 crop factor. And that little package comes in at around $680, which is a fantastic price for what the camera will likely have to offer. And it will be a great little camera, especially for video creators, because they don't really need the viewfinder and they have some fantastic video specs, likely 4K 30 and 4K 60. So all around a very interesting sounding, small and relatively cheap camera. When it comes to the R8, we know a few more specs already. It will also have a 24 megapixel, but this time, most likely the full frame 24 megapixel that comes from the R6 Mark II. So it's a fantastic all-around sensor. The camera will also be able to shoot at 40 frames per second, just like the R6 Mark II, have eye tracking for people, animals, cars, etc., which is also amazing. It will likely have no in-body image stabilization to keep the cost down a little bit. And it sounds like it will have some fantastic video features. It will be able to shoot uncropped 4K 30, 4K 60 and 180 frames per second in full HD. So some amazing video features right there in a nice small package. I say small package because the camera is likely to come in at a weight of under 1 pound, so around 500 grams, which is super small, super nice and super light. And how does Canon get there? They might actually also decide to not have an electronic viewfinder in the R8. While this might be a bit annoying for wildlife shooters like us and makes us want to buy an R6 Mark II instead, for a lot of creators that mainly do video or people that do a lot of street photography that are used to hold the camera right in front of them, this might actually not be a problem and allow Canon to make a smaller, lighter camera and also cheaper. Because this is one of the great features about the R8. It comes in at just $1499, so $1,500. And considering the specs, this is really an amazing price and very close in terms of performance to an R6 Mark II. So I think Canon will have to kind of get out the triple hammer and take a few things away, like the IBIS. It will also likely have just one SD card slot and most likely no viewfinder to have a little bit of separation between this camera and the R6 Mark II, because if it had the viewfinder, then it would essentially be a mini R6 Mark II at a much lower price. In fact, $1,000 cheaper than an R6 Mark II. And then I don't really know why anyone would buy an R6 Mark II if they can have an R8 for a lot less money with very similar specs. Nevertheless, I think the R8 is actually an amazing camera that will put a lot of pressure on Sony and Nikon because they don't have anything with even remotely similar specs on offer that comes in at such an attractive price point. And it's interesting with me because Canon has really been pushing lower end cameras out lately. We now have an R50, an R8, an R7, an R10, an R6 Mark II, all kind of catering for that lower end of the market, giving you fantastic options at very attractive price points. And when we look at Nikon and Sony, there's really nothing in a similar price point with even remotely comparable features in terms of performance, like great autofocus with eye tracking, high frame rates, and also really nice uncropped video features. What do you guys think about the R8 and the R50? Are these very interesting cameras? Do you like that Canon is pushing camera prices down in a way with great specs and lower end bodies that still offer some great performance? Or you're not really interested in an R50 or an R8 because you say, for instance, I definitely need a viewfinder. Whether the R8 has a viewfinder or not, we don't know yet, but I think it makes a lot of sense if it actually didn't have a viewfinder and compete with kind of the A7C from Sony, for instance. And whether you buy a new camera or use your current camera, what's very important is that you learn to get the most out of your RAW files. And this is where I would love to help you with my PROSETS and my masterclass. With my PROSETS, I allow you with just one click to transform your RAW files from the bare looking, boring RAW file into a great starting point for the editing process. And in my masterclass, I teach you step by step all the necessary tools and things you need to know in Photoshop to make your own images look absolutely amazing. So if that's of interest to you, make sure to check this out down there in the description. So why don't we do some unboxing now? Start with that big brown box. And as some of you might have guessed already, these are some of the new tripod heads that I've ordered. And why don't we take a look and see which one I actually got. Some paperwork, cover. So let's take a look. Here's the bottom part. Here we have the gimbal arm. This is another Whippy head Mark II. And you might say, didn't you say you didn't want another Whippy head? And I did. But after doing all my research, I came to the conclusion that for my personal use, a Whippy head is just the best option. It's not as light as some of the other heads, but it's super sturdy and it has done a great job for me over the last 15 years. I can have these flash brackets and I can attach my flash battery to them, put my flash on top, and then all of this easily slides on the arm of the Whippy head and I can have a really nice fill flash setup in the field. All around, I felt like the Whippy head is actually still the best option for me, even though it's kind of heavy. Before we put it together, I must actually admit that I don't enjoy this bottom part too much. I actually like to use this really right stuff cradle clamp with the Whippy head. And now I have this really nice lever here that I can easily open and close, and it allows me to take my lens on and off really easily. So now that we know what my main tripod head will be, why don't we take a look at some of these others that I ordered. More paperwork, and here we got this very odd looking thing. It's called a Flex Shooter Pro. I must admit, looking at it now for the first time, it looks quite strange. But what it promises to do in the field sounds quite amazing. It's kind of a two-in-one tripod head. It has an emergency ball head function where you can move it around, kind of use it like a normal ball head. Tighten it up and loosen that silver knob up here. It promises to perform similar to gimbal head. If you put a big lens on a normal ball head, it would just kind of fall in all directions, basically impossible to use. Whereas this tripod head has a big spring in there that makes the lens stay level or stay whichever direction you put it. So small, so light, and if it actually performs well, I think this would be amazing for traveling. Let's have a quick look what's in this box. This is going to be another flex shooter, this time the mini, mainly for smaller lenses like my 100 to 500 millimeter lens. But why don't we head outside now and actually put one of these big lenses on this tripod head and see how it performs. Out here now with the big lens and the little tripod head, and the voice isolation definitely has to work overtime. There's so many lorikeets here, a lot of wind. I hope that it clears up because this is what it sounds like without it. And now we have the voice isolation back on and hopefully giving me much clearer sound. So before we actually put this big lens on this little tripod head, we have to make one adjustment. We have to make sure that the ball head part of the tripod head is actually level. If it's not level, it doesn't work properly. So I just loosen the lever, level it with a little bubble and tighten it again. And now we're ready to put the big lens on. So open that lever here, slide it on, close it. And if it feels too loose, I can still tighten it a little bit on that black knob here. And then now with the silver knob, we can loosen it. And look at that. Pretty much gimbal-like movement. Not as much of a range as a gimbal, but enough. We don't really want to point up in the sky anyways. And super smooth, super nice, and it feels pretty sturdy. So all in all, I'm very impressed. And the best thing is, if I'm now wanting to take some landscapes, I can take the big lens off, tighten the top part up, put that on, And now I'll loosen the bottom bit and I have ball head-like functionality, can go in pretty much all directions. What do you guys think? Pretty impressive, isn't it? Did I make the right choices with my tripod heads? I know that the Wimbly head will work very well for me in the field when weight isn't a concern and when I need to do some flash work because it has those awesome flash brackets. And when this is just too heavy and too big and too bulky, I feel like that these two flag shooter heads can be a great compromise because they still give me gimbal-like performance without the big and heavy size and weight. So I'm pretty happy with my choices, and I must admit I'm pretty impressed and surprised by these little heads and how well they have performed. And if you guys feel like you might want to try out one of these awesome flag shooter heads yourself, I'll link them down there in the description for you. What do you guys think? Are there any other tripod heads out there that I should still try? I know I'm still very tempted by the Katana because I feel like it just looks really cool, but I just don't know how I would go with that shifting field of view when tightening it. So if you have any other suggestions, make sure to let me know in the comments. There's some good news for people in Europe because Nikon Europe will give people 10% discount on most lenses. Unfortunately, they've excluded most of the new expensive big prime lenses, but most other lenses will enjoy a nice little discount, and hopefully some of you guys can pick up some cheaper lenses. But let's also talk about Nikon blocking not all third-party lenses, but some third-party lenses. And the idea here is that Nikon will allow third-party manufacturers to produce lenses that don't directly compete with Nikon lenses, which actually seems to make a lot of sense when I think about it. For instance, if Nikon has a 24 to 70mm f2.8 lens, they don't want anyone else to make a similar lens with a similar focal range. So they say, for instance, Tamron, you can make a 28 to 75mm lens because that doesn't directly compete with that Nikon lens. So I think this approach actually can work quite well and allows Nikon to secure some of their profits and not directly compete with cheaper lenses from third-party manufacturers. What do you guys think about that approach? Is it better than the Canon approach of just saying no third-party lenses at all? I think it's actually a pretty good way of securing their own profits and still allowing third-party lenses because there's always lenses that Nikon don't want to make that people want to use and that might help to sell more cameras. So allowing at least some third-party lenses seems to make a lot of sense to me. And when it comes to Sony, we're hearing that in the next 1 to 2 months there will also be a new camera announced. I'm not sure if it will be an A9 III just yet. It could also be an A7C Mark II, for instance, but we'll definitely seem to be seeing a few new Sony cameras this year, which is very exciting because I feel like other than the A7 R5, Sony hasn't really released many cameras as of late. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this week's Early Bird Photo News. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give me a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next video very soon. Bye guys.